Ladies and gentlemen, good morning again from the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Asia Pacific. A warm welcome to all of you for joining us for the first briefing of stakeholders in the context of the fourth review and appraisal of MIPAA here in Asia Pacific. It is very good to see you. And I would now like to give the floor to Dr. Srinivas Tata, the Director of the Social Development Division, who will give opening remarks. Dr. Tata, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Sabine. Dear colleagues and friends, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to the first briefing of stakeholders on the preparations and plans for the Asia Pacific Fourth Review and Appraisal of the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging, in short, what we all know as MIPAA. I thank you for accepting our invitation. I would like to extend a special thanks to our partners from the UN system, in particular Unfpa, and also to ADB and HelpAge International for partnering us and actively contributing to this briefing. Ladies and gentlemen, I realize I'm preaching to the choir and the converted. However, it is important to remind ourselves that MIPAA remains the global guiding document on population aging and older persons. Its call to create societies for all ages remains as relevant today as in 2002 when member states adopted MIPAA. More countries in the region will transition from aging to age societies in the near future, with the number and share of the oldest old growing rapidly as well. Even in countries with relatively low proportion of older persons, the sheer numbers are, for countries like India or Indonesia, even an 8% number can turn into more than 100 million or 120 million older persons, which is quite significant. So population aging is a concern and an opportunity for almost all the countries in Asia Pacific. We all know that population aging should not be viewed in isolation from other developments over the life cycle, and what happens in later life has often been influenced by decisions and events that take place earlier in life. Dear colleagues and friends, this summer, when we will meet for the fourth time to review and appraise the implementation of MIPAA in Asia Pacific, I'd like to kind of highlight a few reasons why this review is particularly important. Well, this comes at a time when we are midway through the 2030 agenda implementation, and it's important for this review for really plot for urgent action, especially to address the issues that are faced by older persons. In addition, 2022 also marks the first time when we'll review MIPAA in the context of the decade of healthy aging, which spans from 2021 to 2030, and to which member states agreed in 2020, and we have to look at a better integration between these two frameworks. We are also still in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, which continues to have devastating effects on older persons. We have emerging issues to deal with, including the digital divide, the changing nature of work, and climate change, all of which have a profound impact on older persons, while we are still struggling to address gaps in social protection and healthcare coverage for older persons. So in this context, I think it's cliched, but it's absolutely true that the role of stakeholders is very important and critical. And this is nowhere stated more clearly than in the MIPAA, where it says the non-governmental organization and other stakeholders are very important in supporting governments in the implementation, assessment, and follow-up to the Madrid International Plan of Action. MIPAA emphasizes the bottom-up participatory approach to review, appraisal, and follow-up. We are inviting stakeholders to this first briefing, where we will brief you on the preparation and plans for the review. This is just the beginning, as we propose that this be followed by a series of substantive consultations on MIPAA implementation and future priorities in preparation for the region review. My colleague Sabine Henning will provide more details to you later in the meeting. We hope that all of you will be able to participate actively in the following events, which will inform the intergovernmental meeting this summer. We've also invited representatives of youth groups to address the intergenerational aspects of population aging, and we hope to engage with young people throughout this process. We hope that by engaging with you early, we can start compiling good practices and lessons learned, and also get your views and advice, and all of which can contribute to towards the action-oriented outcomes of the fourth review and appraisal that we're going to have in June and July. Let us work together towards this as we assess the implementation of MIPAA at the national and regional levels this year, and we look forward to learning from you and working with you in creating societies that benefit all ages. I thank you, and it is now my pleasure to introduce Ms. Meredith Wise, Senior Social Development Specialist in ADB, who will moderate this meeting and take us forward. Many of you may know Meredith already, who has much experience in this area, and I'm sure that she will really steer these discussions in an excellent manner. Meredith, over to you, please.
Thank you, Dr. Tata. Thank you for that warm welcome. And yes, I'd like to echo my welcome to everyone. Wonderful to see so many familiar faces joining us for this first briefing on the fourth review and appraisal of the MIPAA in Asia Pacific. So we have a few short presentations really to situate the discussion, and then at the end there'll be Q&As and discussions really to elaborate on some of those key points Dr. Tata has raised about how we can be more engaged in this process to make the process as effective as possible. Our first presentation, I'd like to invite Vanessa Steinmeier from ESCAP to give a short presentation on population aging in Asia and the Pacific. Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you, Meredith, for giving me the floor. My name is Vanessa Steinmeier from the Social Development Division of ESCAP. Next slide, please. In my presentation, I will focus on the key emerging trends that were identified since the last review and which are also reflected in the outcome document of the last review, which is social protection, the situation of older women, living and care arrangements, older persons and ICTs, older persons in rural area, and the future of work and data. And there are emerging issues which came up because of very recent trends. One is climate change and older persons, intergenerational solidarity, which needs to be strengthened, and of course, the COVID-19 pandemic and all its secondary effects. So let me please present some data. Next slide, please. We all know that there are more older women than older men, especially in the age cohorts older than 80. And also the data show that older women are more likely to live alone than older men. Especially, and the gap is particularly high in some countries such as Indonesia and Vietnam, where significantly more older women than older men live alone. Or living alone does not necessarily mean that they have no support, but women living alone are more likely to be left behind. Next slide, please. Also, coverage of pensions remains low in the Asia-Pacific region in spite of efforts to increase coverage in the past years. And the increase is largely to large efforts in China, which received almost full universal coverage of the working age population. In many countries, legal coverage of women is still significantly below that of men, which again contributes to older women being often without income security. Next slide. Employment. Because of the low coverage of pensions, many older persons still have to work. Many want to work, but many also are left without income and need to work. And we can see that most older persons who work, and in many countries such as India, Cambodia, Vietnam, Pakistan, more than 90% of older persons who work are working in the informal sector. Interestingly, the gender gap is relatively small. There are not in some countries, actually, more older men, or the proportion of older men working in the informal sector is higher than that of women, or it is relatively similar. But in other countries, such as Maldives, there is a significantly higher proportion of older women in the informal sector. And yeah, this often leaves them without labor protection and small incomes. Next slide, please. Care. I refer to a study conducted by ESCAP, in which older persons, and particularly older women, are significant providers of unpaid care, which is often that older women, they provide unpaid care for their grandchildren and their spouses. But the question is, if who will provide care for older women when they need it? And this is a question which will require increased policy attention. Also, older women providing unpaid care are often left without any social protection and without require additional recognition in society. And this is also one of the SDGs calling, one of the targets of the SDGs calling for recognition of unpaid care. Next slide, please. Use of ICTs is becoming increasingly important, especially including through the current still ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, where education used to be more online. To remain in social contacts, you needed to be to use technology, including to access healthcare. But this really can leave older persons behind, because they are less likely to use mobile phones or even own a mobile phone. We can see that, and there is very little data on mobile phone use disaggregated by age. We can see that although the mobile phone use is very high in the Asia Pacific region, it is significantly lower among older persons. And also the gender gap between men and women is higher among, in mobile phone use is higher among older persons. So this gap is really something that requires attention if older persons are not to be left behind. Next slide. And the COVID-19 pandemic. So we do not have very hardcore data yet of the impacts of the pandemic on older persons. What is well known that older persons are highest represented in the fatalities and direct death by COVID-19. However, the secondary effects will require long study in the next few years. What is already known from rapid assessments is often they had limited access to healthcare. Some older persons were often afraid of using medical care, or there were restrictions, transport restrictions, and this also has negative effects on other diseases, chronic diseases they may have. Also, there are limited access to medicines. Also, as mentioned, older persons are often working in the informal sector. Many depend on their work and because of lockdowns often suffered loss of income. And then if they usually receive transfers from their family members, if their family members had income losses because of the lockdowns, older persons are again further affected. All this situation has impacts on mental health, and then access to vaccines is a big issue. Many countries prioritized older persons. Some countries had difficulties in planning that access to vaccine, and data sometimes shows for some countries that older persons have actually had limited access to vaccines. In some countries, there's also vaccine resistance among older persons, and they need probably special access to vaccines, and there needs to be communication with older persons. So the impacts of the pandemic will be something that will have to be studied over the next few years when more data will become available. And data remains a key issue on the situation of older persons and aging to be able to make informed decisions. I'm closing here, and thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa, for that quick overview of the situation, really highlighting some of the emerging issues that need to be addressed in addressing the full realization of MIPAA in the region. Next, I'd like to invite Rintaro Mori, a regional advisor on population ageing and sustainable development from UNFPA. Many of you work with UNFPA and as a key partner in really supporting the region in the realization of MIPAA. So a short overview from their work. Thank you, Rintaro.
Thank you very much, Meredith, and thank you very much, the colleagues in ESCAP, to sort of allowing us to sort of they have this communication, to join in the communication. So my presentation is, it's just to briefly give you sort of the overview of our work as a UNFPA, and I think we want to have a more sort of active sort of conversation later on. So for UNFPA, our perspective towards the population aging is sort of the population dynamics. That's what we will focus on. But when we think about population dynamics and population aging, each country or each actual region or each community has a very different type of the issues. Population aging itself might not be a problem at all, but I think that there are lots of issues that related to the population aging that I think the many governments or the stakeholders might want to address or should address, right? So I think our work is really focused on the tailored support to the national and local governments in all even the communities actually. So that's actually our sort of the center of the work. To do so, we actually want to sort of develop some tools and also the advocacy work and also the lots of collaboration. We work with other UN agencies, sister agencies, as well as the stakeholders like you. So for the tailored support from the national local governments, I think we have all actually country offices has a focal personnel for the population aging. So if you have our country office in your country, I think you can contact them. Of course, I think we can facilitate the communication, and I think that we are happy to work with you any issues that related to the population aging. I think some of the actually sort of the needs and I think the demands of the communities or the countries related to the population aging is very different, very quite diverse. So some of the countries we actually working on the long-term care or the social care for the older persons, or even actually the health care of the older person work with the WHO, or there's some of the countries I think they might be wanted to focus on more actually sort of the labour participation, or maybe innovations, or by even actually sort of the working towards the issues related to low fertility. That might be one of the actually the issues related to the population aging. So we see that quite sort of the wider perspective. And I think the needs and the demands, I think they are very different. So, and I think we don't have all expertise within in-house. So you can see that we actually they tend to brokering national and international experts that probably including you, the stakeholders. So we really want to facilitate the collaboration, not necessarily on the regional level, but also the country and the community level to address issues really specific to the settings, right? So I think give it some examples that the tools that we developed. For example, we actually they published a policy catalog. What would be the policy examples that actually are being used or utilized? Some of the other regions as well as the Asia Pacific region, and we actually are planning to develop a repository for that. Also, I think we developed the conceptual framework of the concept called the life cycle approach, which I'm going to talk about later. As well as I think the very the useful actually tool, the research tool called the national transfer accounts. particularly I think the intergenerational actually, so the economy and also demography actually. And the third is actually sort of for the country or the community to use that. I think the when they actually sort of they're looking at the priority setting, we actually developed such a framework and a tool to support this, the priority setting might be using the workshop in the country level or field level. Also, we developed some sort of we are in the middle of actually developing case studies as an implementation guide of some of the sort of the good practices, particularly adopting life cycle approach. And also, I think that we are addressing some of the COVID-19 issues. We developed the technical briefs and also monitoring reports with the HelpAge International. And I think some of you might know that I think we've been running a sort of the regional campaign on the population aging and life cycle approach as a sort of advocacy, the efforts. And as you can see that we actually happy to collaborate any way we could do the MIPAA actually sort of the process or the decade of healthy aging by WHO. So I think we were quite open, and I think we know that the needs and demands of each specific actually sort of the community or the country are very different and diverse, and that's actually one of the most important features related to the population aging. So next slide, I think I'm going to show you the video to briefly explain about the life cycle approach. So if you could run it.
Future. It is 2050. In Asia Pacific, 1 in 4 people are above the age of 60. The majority of them are women. Is she healthy? Is she financially secure? Is she active? Is she happy? Let's rewind. Today, the world's demography is rapidly changing. Women are having fewer babies. People are living longer. Asia Pacific is at the forefront of population aging, but is the region growing older before it grows richer? To bridge the income gap, we must bridge the gender gap. Every girl should have access to quality healthcare and education. She should be equipped with skills and knowledge that set a foundation for life and love. Every woman should have access to rights-based family planning so that she can choose her lifelong pathway. She should be able to decide whether she wants to have children, and if so, when, how many, and with whom. She needs to be able to deliver her baby safely, improving her long-term health as well as the health of her child. She needs to be safe from violence and be in healthy and happy relationships. She needs to be given equal opportunity to actively contribute to society. Only then can she age with dignity. Only then can we age with dignity. A life cycle approach paves the way for a healthy life, a prosperous life, a happy life. We need to start early. We need to start now. There's little time to lose.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rintaro. That was a lovely video, and yes, emphasizes very well the need for gender sensitive and a life cycle approach in the region. And thank you for really highlighting the role of collaboration and partnership. That's what we're all here for today. The last presentation, I'm going to ask Sabine Henning, Chief of the Sustainable Development Demographic Transition section of ESCAP, who's really been leading this process from ESCAP in Bangkok, to give an overview of this appraisal and review process. So over to you, Sabine.
Thank you very much, Meredith, and thank you to the colleagues who already presented. As mentioned, ESCAP will organize the 4th review and appraisal of MIPAA here in Asia and the Pacific. And this presentation is intended to give you an overview of where we are in the process, but also where you can engage with us, with partners, to contribute to this important event, but also process in general. Next slide, please.
The Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging aims to ensure that persons are able to age with security and dignity and with their full rights. Therefore, we are organizing the 4th review and appraisal here in Asia Pacific from 29 June to 1 July. Given the current COVID-19 situation, it is expected that the meeting will take place in a hybrid mode, with some member states, possibly here from Bangkok, attending in the room, but most of you attending virtually. ESCAP is working with members of the informal regional network of UN focal points on aging to organize this meeting. Representatives of ESCAP member states, intergovernmental organizations, UN entities, and stakeholders will participate. The objective of the meeting are as follows: to take stock, review policy developments, discuss regional and sub-regional development and cooperation, but also identify resource requirements, capacity building needs, policy advice, and data needs, and to formulate a plan to accelerate MIPAA implementation in Asia in the Pacific. Next slide, please. As indicated in the MIPAA, the primary responsible for its implementation lies with governments. But NGOs should support member states in implementing, assessing, and following up on MIPAA. This is clearly stated in the Madrid International Plan of Action on Aging. So the voices of older persons, the voices of groups representing older persons or working for him are very important. And in this regard, we here at ESCAP are following a bottom-up approach and would like to hear from you right from the start in terms of MIPAA implementation and what we can do to accelerate implementation. We drafted a guidance note on how we foresee engaging with stakeholders over the next few months and in the future. It's posted on our website. We also circulated it to you ahead of the meeting. So please consult this note and see how we're laying it out for the next few months. Given the life course perspective, and we just heard about it, of population aging, we have also invited some young people or representatives of youth groups to join us, and we would hope that they can be with us throughout the process so we can bring the perspective of older persons and younger people, and of course the middle-aged, together as we're discussing this very important topic. Systematic reviews of implementation, as stated in MIPAA, are very important for future policy making. So it should not only stop in June when we conclude the meeting, but it should continue. And we will engage with member states and stakeholders after the meeting to ensure that we can accelerate implementation in Asia Pacific. Next slide, please. In assessing MIPAA at the national and regional level, it is very important that we build on the synergies between different guiding documents. The first one, of course, is MIPAA itself, but it's closely related and to the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development. The next one would be the 2013 Ministerial Declaration on Population Development, which also focuses in part on older persons issues. And then we have the UN Decade of Healthy Aging, which looks at the health aspects through a new lens, and it complements MIPAA in a very important way. Then, of course, there's COVID, and there's an SG policy brief on all older persons that lays out the main areas in which older persons have been affected by the pandemic. So we should consult that too as we are discussing COVID-19 impacts on older persons. And there is ESG's Common Agenda, which complements 2030 Agenda and many of these other documents, but takes it a bit further. Next slide, please. As we all know, there are 3 priority directions in MIPAA: older persons and development, advancing health and well-being into old age, and ensuring enabling supportive environments. So these are the 3 priority directions, and I highlighted a few key areas that my colleague Vanessa already identified as still very relevant and remaining very challenging. So we will focus in our discussion at the MIPAA review on those, but we also need to address some emerging trends, such as COVID, climate change, digital transformation, intergenerational solidarity, the future of work, and data. So whenever we discuss these 3 priority directions, we intend to also discuss some other topics. Next slide, please. Let me provide you quick overview of where we are in terms of our review process. We started about a year ago by asking member states for nominations of focal points on aging, and we have about 40 to 50 national focal points, which is a very high number and a very good number, and we have been working with them. Last summer, around June, we launched the survey on MIPAA, which we also shared with these focal points. We have some input from this informal network before we launched it, and then it was launched. We offered some capacity building for member states and invited them to actually also follow a bottom-up approach in terms of completing the survey. We're now receiving survey responses. They have been posted on our website, and we're starting to draft documentation. But at this point, we're also now starting to engage more actively with you, and we will hold a number of consultations on these priority directions I just identified. So the consultation, the documentation, the survey, all of this will come together at the intergovernmental meeting, which is then planned for 29 June to 1 July. And after the meeting, we will take the information, we will take the report of the meeting, all the documents we prepared, and hopefully the outcome document to New York, to the global review at the Commission for Social Development in 2023. And of course, we will report on this at the 79th session of the Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific in 2023. Next slide, please. So what are the next steps in terms of engagement with stakeholders? First of all, today is kickoff. It's a briefing of stakeholders. We want to inform you where we are and what we foresee in the future, but we also want to hear from you, and that's later. Just, hearing from you in terms of how can we improve our process. We are planning to have 3 consultations, and there are some tentative dates identified on the slide. The first consultation to be held in early April, and then until May, we plan a total of 3 consultations on the different priority directions with these emerging trends we have identified mainstream throughout. The intergovernmental meeting will then follow in June and July. Let me also invite 2 of my colleagues to turn on their cameras, because they will be leading some of these consultations with you. I would like to ask Mr. Marco Roncarati and Mrs. Vanessa Steinmeier to again turn on their cameras. And thank you, Vanessa. Waiting for Marco, but while we're doing this, so Vanessa and Marco will lead some of these consultations, the 3 we're talking about, in terms of working with you and scheduling them and organizing them. Thank you, Vanessa. And thank you, Marco. Thank you, Marco. So these consultations will be an hour to 2 hours long with some breaks to make it easier. We will draft concept notes and we will draft agendas and identify moderators, but we need you as co-organizers. So there is a call out to you to please step forward and volunteer to be co-organizers for these 3 consultations. I will follow up with an email after the consultation or the briefing today, and please prioritize your interest, because we want to ensure that there's some diversity among the groups, but we would like to call on you to help us co-organize, to draft concept notes, agendas, identify speakers and moderators, and also be note takers during the meeting. We will support you throughout the process, but we want to hear from you and really get you involved in this process. So this is a plan for the next few months. We, of course, want to enlarge our group of stakeholders. Thank you, Vanessa and Marco. I think we can move on. We would like to, thank you. We would like to enlarge the group of stakeholders. So if there are any colleagues that you are familiar with that are working on population aging issues here in the region, please forward the organization's names to us so we can add them to our list of stakeholders. This is the first time we're bringing you all together. For the 4th review, we want to enlarge our database, and so we're very interested in further recommendations. So please let us know if there are others we can include, and then we will follow up also with them in terms of getting them engaged in these consultations. And then closer to the meeting itself, the intergovernmental meeting, we will come back to you and ask for volunteers and discuss with you, in terms of speaking slot, roundtables we will organize, etc. Let me say one more thing in terms of these meetings, these consultations. We intend to take notes and will summarize the main recommendation from these consultations afterwards. So we will have 3 write-ups, which will then inform an information paper, which we will also submit to the intergovernmental meeting. So there's also a written record that will go to the intergovernmental meeting. And these consultations, we hope, will be held following Chatham rules, meaning they will, we will not record, we will not identify people. It's really an opportunity for people to speak freely. We hope to organize small working groups, so smaller groups can discuss. It will all be virtual, but I think by now we are all very familiar how this works, and I think we can really make an interesting consultation discussion out of this. So these are the plans for the next few months, and as I said, we will follow up after the meeting, and we're asking, number 1, for suggestions for additional stakeholders we can involve in the process, and number 2 is for any volunteers to help us co-organize these 3 consultations that we're planning over the next few months. And with that, I would like to conclude and thank you again for participating. Meredith, over to you.
Thank you very much, Sabine. That was very clear. There was quite a lot of information in that presentation outlining the process and really the request for support and collaboration going forward. If there are specific questions, please do add them into the chat box and we'll come back to them at the Q&A session. Also, many of you submitted questions prior to the meeting and we'll also come back and address some of those. So while you're absorbing that information and the overview of the process, I'd just like to invite some sort of reflections really from the group on sort of the MIPAA processes and the importance of this stakeholder engagement. So I'd like to ask Mr. Eduardo Clean, Regional Representative from Asia Pacific from Help Age International, to make some comments. Eduardo, I believe you've been engaged in this process for many, maybe the first or at least the second and third review processes. Reflecting on those learnings, really, what are some of the sort of the importance of this consultation and consultative process, and what would you really like to see moving forward over the next few months, if you have any comments on that?
Thank you, Meredith, and thank you, ESCAP, for organizing this briefing and updating us on the roadmap and the ways of engaging in the process. I have been in, perhaps I'm the only one in this call who has been in the 4 reviews. I remember the first one was in Macau in 2004, if I'm right. And I see that we have been gradually becoming better and better in seeking the voice of older people, seeking the analysis of the actual situations in Asia, because at times we can see that the stories, the evidence, the images emerging from other parts of the world do not necessarily correlate to the situation in Asia. So the engagement of stakeholders is crucial to steer the review in the right direction, because there is one point that Sabine mentioned. We are not only reviewing it for the sake of reviewing it. We want to continue with the implementation of the recommendations of MIPAA. And Vanessa mentioned the emerging issues and the emerging issues that had come in previous reviews. And there are, I counted them, there are 10 situations, 10 issues that came after the MIPAA review in 2022, which means that we are living in a very, I wouldn't say volatile, but very changing context. And the key drivers of that for us are population aging, and population aging is intersecting with other processes, but I want to highlight 2 of them. One is the pandemic that showed, like no other situation, the actual vulnerabilities and potentials of older people. Why do I say these two sides of the coin? Because showed that older people were particularly affected, but also showed the power of older people in their communities. And that's something that some stakeholders who are present in this meeting, I think I know most of you, have highlighted once and again since 2020, since the pandemic started, how older people associations, intergenerational clubs, community-based organizations, older people were supporting others in the community, were supporting other older people, and were supporting the communities as a whole. So in general, I think this opportunity is a space for actual sharing those experiences, and the new issues like climate change, and seeing older people not only as disproportionately affected, but how older people can really engage in climate action. They are a force, they are a substantial segment of the population, but they are also better educated, better health than they were in 2002 when MIPAA was drawn. So with that, I just want to say that I know that many organizations are willing, are like you know, at the departure point, willing to get engaged. And I'm sure this review and the way it has been described by Sabine presents an ideal opportunity. Thank you very much, Meredith.
Thank you, Eduardo, for those reflections. So we'll open up to sort of Q&A. There's a lot of active chat and there's a lot of volunteers, which is wonderful to see. I would just like to start off as taking the role as moderator to reflect on some of the questions that were submitted prior to the meeting. There were two key themes that heavily emerged, and Eduardo's kind of reflected it then. But I think it's a question for ESCAP in terms of how COVID and the impacts of COVID is going to be reflected throughout MIPAA. And the second question that was quite common was really the role and engagement with local municipalities in the process. I don't know if Sabine or Vanessa, you would like to address those two questions, of which there were numerous, they were raised numerous times.
Thank you very much. I don't know. Yes, and I also would like to call, of course, on Dr. Tata to come in any time on any of this, and Vanessa, of course. From our perspective, COVID affects all aspects of life of older persons. So therefore, we decided not to have a dedicated session at the meeting, but have it covered throughout the meeting in all the different priority directions, because it's so important and it's so all-encompassing in terms of affecting older persons. So that's on COVID. And regarding the local communities, I know we have invited some to participate today, and we're also interested in finding out what local communities are doing to work with older persons, to make life easier for them, to provide access to services, infrastructure, etc. I mean, all these different aspects that people are faced on a day-to-day basis are something that happens in these local communities. And so therefore, we would really like to hear from them and learn from them about good practices from Asia Pacific. So that's how we saw them coming in. And maybe they're actually here with us today and can take the floor and enlighten us a little bit. But I think that's something that could come out in these consultations. But I don't know, anyone from the local communities, but also maybe Vanessa might want to add, or Srinivas. Thank you.
Srinivas, would you like to add to that?
Yes, I think Sabine put it very, very, very succinctly when she said, look, when you look at issues of COVID, you know that it has affected the income security. It's affected every single pillar of MIPAA. And the way we will structure it, the way we structure the roundtables, COVID will be covered effectively and at center stage. but of course, mainstream throughout the discussions. And I'm sure we will, while not at all pushing it to the edges, but definitely addressing it, but in a cross-cutting manner. So, and I would also like to take this opportunity. I see some wonderful comments coming in the chat, very substantive. And a lot of these can really feed into the substantive discussions when we have those priority pillars oriented, the 3 areas, and we hope that with the 3 substantive consultations, we're going to dig deeper into a lot of these issues. And I really think that there were certain questions, and maybe you'll come to that later, is about what does it take for co-organizing. I mean, it's a virtual meeting, and we don't expect money from anyone, but it's your leadership, your interest in joining us to say, okay, how do we structure this? So it's just about some of you stepping up. Since it is a meeting of stakeholders, we would like to involve stakeholders in the organization of it. So a few of you to lead off on it. Thank you, Meredith. Maybe I jumped the gun by going and answering that, but that's I thought it would clarify a few doubts which are already appearing there. Thank you, Sabine. Anything from your side to add to that would be great. And I have to say that, Sabine, this whole stakeholder consultation pillar is something that we built upon. And I would like to really thank Sabine and the team, Vanessa and others, really for deciding that this review has to be as much about the stakeholders. Of course, governments are at the center, but we have to put stakeholders equally at the center. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And reflecting on that, one of the key sort of questions that we were looking for inputs on is who else needs to be engaged in this process. I see in the comments Hassan Khan from Fiji has already highlighted that there needs to be stronger engagement with specific stakeholders, and so some follow up there in perhaps identifying some. And also has been highlighted that the very positive engagement of organisations, of youth organisations. But are there any comments or suggestions as to other key stakeholders that should be engaged in this process that perhaps haven't been engaged before? Sorry, I can't. There's a couple of hands up. Sorry for my delay. Thelma, I see you've got your hand up twice, actually. Would you like to comment? No. Would anyone else like to add anything on stakeholder participation?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Hello, Phil. Yes. Hello, yeah. Phil. How are you?
Yeah. Okay. Hi, everybody. Eduardo, I was also there from Macau onwards, so I'm very glad to see we have this continuity here. Meredith, I was going to suggest, what about the private sector? How are we going to engage the private sector, the business sector, which has been very active both in terms of providing services, products, and can play a big role, I think. And now, especially when they're realizing, maybe this is not the way we see it, but realizing that the older people are a big market. As I said, this is not the way we see it, but the fact is, this is a fact of life. So how do we engage them? And many of them do mean to do well for the older persons. So how are we going to engage them?
Thank you, Thelma. And I think the other group that I was reflecting, especially on the UNFPA video, was really women's groups as well, right. Mm-hmm. Right. Absent today, that they could make a very valuable contribution.
That's true. That's true. And also disability group, because they have a lot on age-friendly environment.
Yes. I don't know if ESCAP would like to respond on this. It's quite a challenging question, how to effectively engage the private sector in this consultation or in the process. Or it needs more reflection, suggestions.
If I may, this is Sabine, and thank you, Thelma, for joining us and making these very useful suggestions. we're relying on you also to give us the names of organizations and representatives that we can invite, especially when it comes to these consultations. And that's why we want you as co-organizers, because I think you know best who we can approach and invite for this consultation, but then also for the bigger meeting. I mean, if are there any ones, you know, that you think are really speaking for a particular sector, for a particular interest group, etc., let us know. So we would really like to hear from you, and you can email us after the meeting. That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. I see lots of hands up. Sorry.
I think Abha Chaudhary wanted to intervene. She put a hand down. Maybe that's.
May I?
Yes, please, please.
Okay, thank you. Good morning to everybody, and thanks a lot, ESCAP team. We've been a part of the process right from 2002, so almost 20 years down the lane. We have attended all the meetings of ESCAP so far, and we have made substantial progress in India, which has the second largest population of older persons in the world, and a hugely heterogeneous population of elderly people. As I raised in the chat box, my concerns are regarding the older women, who constitute one of the biggest groups in our population. Concerns of widows, older widows, all are being gradually addressed in the Shanghai implementation strategy and the Macau plan. Gradually over the years, they have been addressed. But what concerns me have been the last two very, very trying years of the pandemic, which have had a devastating impact. And I strongly recommend that maybe at the local, regional, national level, we should launch with maybe perhaps a guided or a common questionnaire from ESCAP Secretariat. We could do in our own countries some kind of a need assessment or impact assessment of this pandemic on older persons. It is very important to document what challenges they have gone through and what effective strategies could be formulated for the vulnerable older population. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that suggestion. Absolutely a key point. Srinivas.
Just wanted to come back on the private sector suggestion, Meredith, and I would like your input on that. One, I think it's important, of course, to reach out to industry groupings. I mean, you know, in terms of whether regional or national. I know that the World Economic Forum has a specific pillar which looks at maybe aging and health issues. So we will reach out to them and ask if they can be represented to reflect the views. But maybe if you got suggestions of industry associations who are kind of addressing this as part of their core business or as part of CSR or whatever, people who have done a little bit of thinking, whether it be from, and I think there'll be certain countries which may be more advanced than others, whether it be countries like Singapore or Hong Kong, or there's some where the aging process is pretty advanced, and there are good examples. And of course, suggestions are welcome from others. So Thelma, I'm really looking for you for suggestions from Singapore. We will look around, but your point is absolutely well taken. Maybe it's important to get, especially for certain pillars, for all the pillars, the participation of private sector, and we will definitely kind of put together maybe an idea about a group of people. So it's a second. Yes, I saw Stephanie Allen already saying that she's on the WF Futures Council for Healthy Aging and Longevity. We will definitely be taking up on your offer, Stephanie. So we will, it'd be great if you can intervene at some point and tell us too. The second point, we will, Sabine is where we've done this in the context of our migration meeting in terms of what it means for co-organizing. We will be putting together very quickly, you know, to get interest. So we will organize this, and Sabine will revert maybe soon, just during this discussion, as to how we intend to follow up on how you can express interest and what will be your duties. Thank you so much, Meredith. I hope that is clear.
Thank you. Thank you. Susanna, hi, I see you have your hand up.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, Meredith. I'm at the office, that's why I'm wearing mask. I have two comments. One is I'm quite happy to see that there's a lot of organizations that would like to commit to co-organize. So UNESCAP, I think you would find a lot of us wanting to contribute and really be part of the process and to support this initiative. So perhaps because there's multi-stakeholders, so and the region is massive in that sense. So from up north down to the south. So I think there is, although you've given us only 3 schedules, I don't know if there is a potential for some kind of a bit of like more than just the 3, if there are 1 or 2 organizations that are willing to co-organize, kind of working together, but perhaps taking a bit of putting together, and then because otherwise it may be too massive for the whole region in that sense, if we talk about Asia Pacific. So that's one. So kind of like I see a few other organizations, like for us, we want to, we're very much interested in co-organizing the health and well-being, but I've seen others also have said that they are interested. So perhaps you can work together and see how we can support each other. The second is around the private sector. There's APEC in this region, which is Singapore based. There are also, I think we could also go into the, the trade organizations that that are part of the embassies, foreign embassies in this part of the region that would have the contacts for the private sector in each of the countries that they work with, especially in the developing countries. So that might be also a way for us to reach out to this private sector and who may be interested in terms of being involved in this process. So those are my 2 suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susanna. So I'd like to, there's a number of questions in the chat box, again, to clarify on processes, and again, reflecting on Susanna's comment there. There's a question about the country, the processes within country, which perhaps Sabine, you could clarify. But yes, there's a lot of questions about how to be very involved in this process going forward, and a lot of ideas coming through.
Thank you very much. And we'll clearly review all these questions and try to figure it out as we go along. But it's very helpful. And please know we're taking good notes of all these questions you're raising in the chat, but also when you're taking the floor. Just to repeat, the focus was on the 3 priority areas. But if there's interest in sub-regional, for example, consultations, and if you would like to volunteer, we'll clearly not stand in your way and we will support you. So there will be a follow-up email after this meeting asking again for the volunteers, and we will put in the option of, if you're interested in organizing something at a sub-regional level, then that's a possibility and we'll work with you. How does it work? I introduced my 2 colleagues already, Vanessa and Marco, and they will lead on organizing or helping you to organize these consultations. Once we have the volunteers, we will come back to you and schedule a phone call so we can discuss the concept note, the agenda, how you want to schedule it, the questions, the guiding questions, who you want to see on the panels as a moderator, and also who would take notes. These consultations will be virtual, and normally we had some experience on migration. They were about 3 hours long. We recently convened a similar or close to or ended a similar process on migration. 3 hours long seemed to be okay in terms of attention span for people, with some breaks in between, and then also, of course, focus groups. So we will break out into these working groups with smaller consultations on the side, and then coming back to the plenary to present everything. As I said, this is Chatham House rules. So we will not attribute what you're saying or what the colleagues are saying to any particular person. We will just try to summarize what comes out of this in a very general way. That's why we need the note takers. And after each consultation, we'll try to have a short write-up so that we have a written record, which we will then use to write an information paper for the meeting. I also, however, would like to forewarn us that, you know, time is limited. We're all overworked and have a lot of things on our minds and our schedules. So we also have to be a bit realistic of what we can do. I think it's great to have this enthusiasm coming out, and we would like to engage with you, but also let's try to, you know, spread a bit of the responsibilities and get everyone involved. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sabine. So I see I was going to come to Raiko next, but I see, Raiko, has your question, Sabine just answered your question? Or would you like to make a further comment?
No, I raised my hand because Tata said that I should raise my hand, but my question has been already answered. Thank you.
Okay, so as Sabine has sort of hopefully answered many of the questions and points there about how to get engaged that ESCAP will be following up. Is there any further sort of clarifications now? There's a very, very rich discussion in the chat with a lot of ideas and enthusiasm, which is wonderful. But yes, anything that should be addressed now? There's a key question on how is actually the survey process going? How many member states have responded so far?
I can answer that. So far, it's about 15 member states, and we know of about 10 others that are forthcoming. So that's, but I know COVID has delayed some of this, so that's why there has been some delay. We have posted them online. I think my colleagues can also put the link to the website into the chat box, so you know where to look for it. I just wanted to reiterate that, you know, we're looking for these volunteers, and if you have any additional people that we should invite, we would very much welcome that as well. So anyone, you know, you think of can contribute, please let us know and we'll bring them to the table. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Srinivas.
I just want to respond to a specific question about certain participants here asking if they can work with their government focal points to organize national reviews. Totally fine. I mean, there are many of them who have been very active, and it's great that some of you have this great working relationship with the national focal points, and that's the way it should be. And so we, in our invitation that will be going out, are going to encourage that even the delegations that actually come for the review or represent countries in the review should include all stakeholder representatives. I mean, representatives from all different stakeholders. And please go ahead if you feel that we had in our suggestions, in our note verbal, suggested that they could organize national reviews, but I suppose COVID is creating certain barriers. While many of them are sending in surveys, the actual conduct of reviews in terms of getting people together to talk about it may be not that strongly implemented. So if you do have the wherewithal to talk to them and organize it, more power to you, and we'll be very happy to kind of support you in that process. So that's indeed, and it's great if it happens before, much before. If it happens after too, no problem, because you can really take the outcomes of the meeting and talk about how you're going to implement it. So it's not something that if you can't do it before June, you can't do it later. You can do it later, but maybe focus on implementation. It's either preparation or implementation. At any time, such national reviews would be great. Thank you so much, Meredith. That's much.
Thank you. And Sabine.
I wonder if any of the representatives from the youth groups are with us, and if they maybe want to take the floor and see or help us identify how they can contribute to the process. So I was wondering if anyone is there who would like to help us figure this out. Thank you.
Would anyone like to comment on that, either in the chat or verbally? Okay. Okay, well, doesn't seem to be a response, so we need to follow up with that then. So yes, how we can really, the question was on are there representatives of the youth organisations engaged in this meeting that would like to comment on how we can really engage with them effectively in this process. Okay. Yes, Josiah. Hello.
Hi, thank you, Meredith. I'm Josiah and I'm connecting from Fiji. I'm a staff of the Fiji Council of Social Services. However, I also sit with our National Youth Council here and a few other youth groups with specific interest on social justice and climate change. I was just going through this. It's my first time to be in such platform, and it's a great pleasure to just to sit and to listen to the discussion going on. One thing that I'd like to share with us, and that is here in Fiji, and not only Fiji, but few of the youth groups across the Pacific. One thing that we are ensuring in our youth program, the so-called youth program, and that is intergenerationality, how we bring both the generation together and learning from the lived experiences, and also a community of practices of our ancestors, and which most of us young people are not aware of, but our older generations are very much aware of, and that is one thing that we've implemented in our program. And I was just trying to think around, how can young people be intentionally used and engaged, not only as group but as individual, in programs that also focus with population aging. And I think that would be a start for us to be included as well in the process, in the program, any programming or any project that is available. If the young people can be intentionally engaged and supported, and this will also create, it will give us more of like give us a leap of faith in carrying this, not only not to be, I'm sorry to use the word ignorant, not to be ignorant of our elders in the community, but to work with them through our youth project as well. Thank you.
I think if that perspective can be brought into the stakeholder consultations from Fiji and other countries in the region, that will be really powerful to take forward to the review at the end of June. So thank you for that, Josiah. Okay, well, I am very conscious that we have taken up quite a lot of, gone a little bit over our schedule, because there was a lot of enthusiasm and a lot of ideas and a lot of volunteers. So we have gone a little bit over schedule, but I really do appreciate, and I think it was worth while spending a few more minutes on this key consultation. With that, unless Sabine would like to say anything else, I'd really like to thank everybody for their participation in this session. It really does sound like the stakeholder consultations going forward will be a very exciting and valuable process. So I do hope to be able to join some of those as well. So with that, yes, thank you all for attending. I would like to hand over to Srinivas to wrap up the meeting and closing remarks and next steps. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Meredith. I think you've really, your hard act to follow, you really steered us very well. And as you say, it was a very, very participative meeting with great amount of enthusiasm shown. We are humbled, and we believe that we have laid the foundation for a very strong, for a process where we can ensure the effective and meaningful engagement of all stakeholders. This is only the beginning. Yes, maybe there are certain, I mean, we've got a lot of ideas from you. And I believe that we have, we're going to use a lot of this. You've given us a lot of homework. We're going to reach out to a lot of you. Please feel free to write to us to tell us who else you need, or who needs to be engaged in the process. We already are aware that we need to involve the private sector. A few of you have offered to help, and we'll be reaching out to you. We hope that that will be a good pillar. Apart from that, we will, of course, be reaching out to you also in terms of structuring this process of the 3 substantive consultations and to ensure your active leadership in this process and engagement throughout. But there is one bigger spin-off. We are in the process. This group, I think, will form the nucleus of what I believe will be a strong regional stakeholder CSO coalition, including organizations of older persons, to support all future reviews and implementation of MIPAA in the region. I think once we put together such a critical mass and put a structure around it, I think this would be the first step. Marianne Sao referred to it about the need for for a coalition like this. And I think I'm hoping that the process of stakeholder consultation that we put for the 4th review will form a foundation for a longer term formation of a coalition, which will get stronger and stronger and live well beyond and support the implementation of aging programs throughout the region. That apart, it's my very happy and pleasant job to thank all our partners, all the stakeholders for participating in this consultation. Please complete the evaluation survey. A link has been posted in, I think, in the chat box for all of you to complete. Take a little bit of time. You can scan the, you can use the link, or I think they will also post a code. Last but not least, we need to have a group photo. I think this is the beginning of a good process, and I hope a process that will live for long. And we want to start switching on your camera so that all of us take a group photo to show how we have engaged in this first step in this process of stakeholder consultation. So I request all of you to switch on your cameras, and my team will take the photographs and tell us when they're ready. Hakim, are you leading the process, or is it Alicia?
I think Alicia will be leading, but we'll take a few. Let's take a few just to be safe. So.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Yes, I will be leading the group photo. We will take a couple of photos, so please bear with me. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's take one more time. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's take one more time. Okay. 1, 2, 3. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you again for joining us. We have really, I think it's been an unprecedented success. Stay healthy, and we promise not to drop contact. We will be in touch with you. Please partner us in this process. Really looking forward to it.